Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, today we're again joined by a special guest, Neil Thompson, the author of Teach the Geek to Speak. Neil, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. So it turns out you're not just an author, but you're a speaker, a writer, the founder of Teach the Geek, online learning academy for STEM professionals. Sounds like you're keeping yourself pretty busy.
Oh, no question. You know, when I decided to work for myself as opposed to being an employee, I really wanted to work on things that I found interesting. And so all these things that I'm doing, these are all things that interest me, so I decided to pursue them.
So James gave me a little bit of information about you. So I'm going into this one a little bit blind. James didn't give me.
I typically do all of the work, and Luke is just kind of here as, I don't know, the voice of the show.
I think I bring the comedic humor. So James basically gave me the lowdown. So you're an ex-engineer, and you kind of got into this public speaking, or teaching people how to speak kind of out of necessity. So, but before all that happened, just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of some of your background, some of the things you did, perhaps where you went to school, maybe some of the places you worked, and how you got to the point you're at right now.
Sure. Well, I live in Southern California, in San Diego now. I've been here for about 11 years, but I'm originally from Canada. I'm from a city called Brampton. It's a suburb of Toronto. So usually when I'm here in the U.S. and people ask me where I'm from, I say Toronto, because if I say Brampton, they won't know what the hell I'm talking about.
Of course.
But I basically grew up there, and I went to the University of Toronto for my undergrad, and I studied materials engineering. And then after that, actually when I came to the U.S. to go to graduate school, I went to Clemson to do a master's, and I did that in 2002. So I was 2 years of that in bioengineering, and then I actually started a failed PhD. I lasted about a year.
I might start saying that.
I started a failed PhD.
That sounds amazing.
To be fair, and I've told this story to our listeners before, I've started a failed MBA I'm going to go with, because I was looking into getting one, and when it requested, I think it was a 1,500-word essay about why I wanted to get it, I was like, ooh, that's too much work, and I quit. So I failed really early on in that process.
What if I had a failed undergraduate degree?
Maybe that's what you had.
Okay.
So could you tell us why it failed?
The main reason it failed is because I didn't really want to do a PhD in the first place. Yeah. I was in that program because my father said do a PhD, and at least back then I used to do everything he said. But I realized after that year, PhDs take at least 4 years typically, and they can take even longer. And I quickly realized I don't want to be here for another 4, 5, 6, however many years. So, at some point you got to start living for yourself. So I quit after that first year.
I think that's reasonable. And I don't want to point out all the failures that all of us have had, but some of our listeners actually in the last, especially me, some of our listeners in the last couple of weeks have been actually asking, what have you learned from internships, from schooling, and even from work now that has kind of changed your point of view and changed your perspective on engineering and on the work you would be doing. So I think that's a perfect example for them that, a PhD, yeah, that's great. You should have one, right? Well, maybe it's not for everyone.
Yeah. So did you come out of school and start working in industry as an engineer with some of the stuff that you learned, or did you know pretty much right away when you were in school that, hey, I don't think I necessarily want to do engineering, and then you kind of went this route you're on right now?
Oh, no, I worked in engineering for almost 10 years. So
wow.
So when I left the PhD program, I then had to find a job. So I moved back in with my dad. That was probably the worst 7 months of my life. Living with my dad, especially because he's mad because I dropped out of the program. Right. He's not happy I'm there, and I'm not happy I'm really there either. I didn't even unpack my boxes for the first few months because I thought I'm going to find a job easily. I had a master's degree, in engineering, so I thought it would be easy. But 1 month turned into 2, turned into 3, and I'm starting to think, well, I might be here longer than I thought. But I started unpacking things. But luckily, after 7 months, I got a job at a small startup company in the Boston suburbs. And I worked there for a little under 2 years. And then I got a job here in the San Diego area. And I moved out here in late 2007. And I've been in California ever since. But essentially, here in California, I've worked in medical devices. as a product development engineer, and I really enjoyed the work. And the only thing is that I guess working for myself, I prefer, because I get to work on the things that I want to work on, and I get to make those decisions. When it comes to actually, I guess, public speaking, I never had to do any of that when I was in school. And even my first job, I didn't have to do it either. So it wasn't really something that was on my radar. When I took the job here that caused me to move to California, I learned after I took the job that public speaking actually was going to be a part of it. So I was a project lead. I thought I was just going to be a product development engineer, but as a project lead, it kind of combines the product development part and I guess project management, which I didn't know I would be doing when I took the job. And as part of the project management part, I had to give presentations in front of management every month. And I was not good at it at all at first. It was embarrassing.
Yeah.
I get up there.
What was it that made you not good at it, in your opinion? Because I saw on your webpage and in some of your descriptions that, you had a lot of failed meetings with management, and this is kind of what set you on the Teach the Geek to Speak path, we'll say. So what made you feel like you weren't good at presenting or speaking with management, and how long did you go on bumbling as an engineer then before you really started to adopt this philosophy of Teach the Geek to Speak?
The big, I guess, the aha moment for me was, at least in those first few presentations, I noticed that a lot of the questions I was getting were questions I answered in the presentation. So it made me realize that I'm not presenting the information in a way that the management is able to take in. And once I realized that, I had to make some big changes in the way that I was presenting to them.
Okay. Makes sense to me. I kind of have that. Maybe I have that problem. I think I clearly tell people what they need to understand when I'm talking to them.
No,
and then I get very angry when they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing. And I like to chalk it up to that they weren't listening and that they weren't paying attention to me. But I'm getting the feeling that maybe it might be a me problem.
Well, I know whenever you and I are speaking, it is because I'm not listening, and I tend to ask questions over and over again. But no, I know what you mean. So I think James and I have both been in those situations with our current job, and we're not in engineering. We do marketing for engineering.
I feel like I'm in engineering.
Sometimes.
Adjacent.
But we've all been there where it's like, I just answered that question. Are you kidding me? You need me to repeat myself? So I never thought of it really as a me problem and I wasn't presenting it. I just always assumed their ears just aren't working was the way I thought of it. So I think it's interesting that you took that approach where you were going to work on that and work on how you're presenting and speaking in those situations. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, another thing that I just thought of is when it came to me presenting in front of senior management, I have this expertise in product development in medical devices, and a lot of the senior management, they don't. So I'd be presenting things that perhaps they don't know as much about. So I had to become a lot more mindful in how I presented information to them. It's different when you're talking to somebody who knows your field than talking to someone who doesn't. So that's definitely something that I had to take into account.
So another thing too that I think comes up is there's this assumption that engineers and STEM professionals, they just sit in cubicles all day long, and I think that's maybe accurate in some cases, but in your experience and all the different jobs you've had, so how would that percentage maybe break down between like traditional heads down engineering or being in a situation where you actually have to be able to speak and present that material to kind of like go against that stereotype as we're all sitting there with our pocket protectors, with our heads down typing?
Right. So yeah, there definitely is an aspect of that in especially in product development and R&D. But I guess more and more, it's becoming more important for engineers to be able to speak to people, whether it be the management or customers or just even other employees, non-technical employees in the company. I think I quickly realized that if I wasn't able to get my point across to a lot of these non-technical people, that could be the difference between projects getting canceled or projects getting approved. And I really wanted to keep my job, so I saw it as really important for me to be able to communicate a lot better with these people. But that point is taken. There's a lot of engineers out there that perhaps don't see the importance of becoming better public speakers, but I mean, the ones that have some sense, they definitely do.
It's that carrot of keeping your job always driving you. That's a good one. So it sounds like Teach the Geek is a full-time gig for you at this point, and you don't have to suffer the life of an engineer anymore. Is that right?
That's right.
Oh, man.
We got to do something
I know,
different.
we're doing it wrong. That's wonderful. I feel like being your own boss is really the dream. I'm sure it's not all it's cracked up to be a lot of the time, but it sounds wonderful to me.
Yeah, I can't complain. Plus, I get to live here, and I can live wherever I want now that I work for myself. And I already like living in Southern California, but I never lived in the city of San Diego. I always lived kind of adjacent to it in the suburbs. And even for a while, I lived in Orange County. And that was because the jobs that I had, that's where they were. And so I wanted to live close to work. But now that I work for myself and can live wherever I want, I decided I'm going to live in the city of San Diego.
Makes sense.
He keeps rubbing it in.
I know.
So James and I are literally in the polar vortex in Pittsburgh right now, and it's literally like 2 degrees outside. So you've said San Diego, I think 4 times so far. So we can stop saying.
Not that
San
we hold
Diego.
it against you at all.
I do have a question about like your childhood a little bit without getting too psychological here.
Well then.
So like as a young kid, I know that I wasn't a great presenter or speaker as a young kid, and I'm wondering how much of this ability to speak publicly for like engineers goes all the way back to like those childhood experiences, whether it's in school and the teacher says read out loud in front of the classroom and you're not prepared or you're not ready, or maybe you're not a great reader like I was. I'm wondering,
were you saying not a great reader like you were a great reader, or he was not a great reader like you were also not a great reader?
I am a terrible reader.
Okay.
So how much of it would you equate to like it's just nature, like you were just kind of brought up that way where you didn't get those opportunities, versus it sounds like you're talking like you can teach this to people and really bring that out. So how much of it is learned and how much of it is it's just inside of you the way that it is?
When I was a kid, I actually did have to do quite a bit of public speaking, ironically, but it wasn't by choice. It wasn't something that I sought out. So my mother was really, I have 2 sisters. I have an older sister and a younger sister, and yet I was the one that was forced to do all this stuff in terms of public speaking. To this day, I'm not exactly sure why.
Yeah.
It's not as if I showed any kind of interest. I was a very lazy child. I didn't want to do much of anything. But my mother was very adamant about me doing stuff at school, and then also at church. After church, there'd be a lot of extracurricular activities for the kids, and I'd have to participate in those things as well. Christmas plays and then cultural shows and all kinds of things. Black History Month presentations. I was involved with all of it, and I volunteered for none of it. But so I had to do quite a bit of public speaking as a child, and I basically left all of that alone when I became a student. When I started my undergrad, I was like, okay, my mother can't force me to do anything anymore. I'm 18, so I'm not doing any public speaking at all. And I didn't until I started this job in Southern California back in 2007. So I was definitely out of practice.
I like that at 18, he's like, Mom can't make me do anything anymore. But he still decided that Dad was the reason he should go get his PhD. Adds up in my head. So before we get into more about the actual book writing process, what people are going to learn from it, what 3 tips could you give to our listeners to help make them better public speakers, or at least improve their confidence when they're speaking?
Well, the number 1 tip is when you're presenting to people, you really need to be mindful of the people you're speaking to. And that's something that I definitely didn't take much into account at first. But just knowing the type of audience that you're talking to. So, I'm coming from somebody that's a product development engineer. If I'm talking to a bunch of salespeople, I'm certainly not going to use a bunch of technical jargon to talk to them, because they're not going to know what I'm talking about, and they're going to tune out. I would have just wasted all that time and effort, putting that presentation together if they're not going to listen. So that's the first thing. Definitely make sure that when you're preparing your presentation, you're taking your audience into account. And then the second thing, and this is just a big pet peeve of mine, is timing. A lot of times we have a time limit as to how long we're presenting, especially at conferences. So as part of my job, I used to go and present our work at conferences. And I would notice that there would be an agenda for the conference, and every person that's presenting has a time to present, but it would become rather obvious pretty early on who was obeying that time limit and who wasn't. And a lot of times that comes down to practice. They didn't practice it enough under timed conditions. So oftentimes they would just go over time, and they would just throw the whole agenda of the conference off kilter. And especially if it's around lunchtime, and I can't go to lunch because I'm sitting here, right. Listening to these presentations. I'm starting to get a little annoyed. So when it comes to public speaking, always keep time in check as well. And then a third tip I would have has to do with PowerPoint slides. Oftentimes, what I've noticed, especially in engineering, is people will throw a whole bunch of text on a slide.
That's the best.
And then read the slide. And then just keep doing that for every slide. So essentially, you never really see their face. All you see is maybe the top of their head because they're looking at their screen, or they're looking at the slides. So you see the side of their face.
Right.
It's very difficult to engage an audience if you're just reading slides, and especially if they're reading your slides too, and they're not really listening to what you're saying. I mean, essentially, you could have just said nothing and just be a slide flipper, I guess. You just click the button to go from slide to slide. You didn't have to say
this slide. Next.
Yeah,
now
indeed.
read this slide.
It's interesting you talk about the PowerPoint, because actually one of the best presentation books that I read, and this was years ago. I read a book called The Secret Presentation Skills of Steve Jobs. And it wasn't written by Steve Jobs. It was another author. But basically, if you've ever seen any of Steve Jobs' presentation, it's like there's a picture on the screen, or there's one word or two words, and that's the slide. And it's all and I think what happens with PowerPoint is people become PowerPoint's a crutch. It's like, I don't have to memorize my stuff if it's all up on the screen. And it was a good book, but it basically all came down to better or less is better, more is worse, memorize, rehearse, practice. So I love that you brought up the PowerPoint, because I think a lot of people forget about the PowerPoint, and they're like, oh, I'm going to cram everything I can into that. And I know I do that myself sometimes. I just put a slide together for my boss the other day, and I think I had 4 pictures and 15 bullet points on it. And in hindsight, it's just like, oh, why did I do that? So.
All right. Well, speaking of tip number 2 and time constraints, I think this would be a perfect time for us to take a break for a word from our sponsor.
I'm assuming it's Teach the Geek to Speak, right?
I mean, I'm waiting for the check in the mail, but I think we're going to give Neil a chance to tell us a little bit more about how you could find his resources, get in touch with him. I know you have a Twitter handle, you have YouTube, you have the Facebooks. What else can people be doing here?
Yeah, for sure. You can go to teachthegeek.com to find out more about me and the course. And you're right, I do have a YouTube channel where I interview people that work in the STEM fields that do public speaking. You can find that at youtube.teachthegeek.com. And you're right, I also have a Twitter handle, Teach the Geek. And then there's the Instagram handle, Teach the Geek. And then the Facebook handle, Teach the Geek.
You're all over the socials.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, get in touch with me and basically Teach the Geek.
All right, so Teach the Geek. Anything with that? I guess you can always just Google it too and find it.
Yeah.
So let's move on to talk a little bit more about Teach the Geek and about the book. So which came first, the book or the online course that you offer? Or maybe it was done in parallel?
No, definitely wasn't done in parallel. So I developed the course first. So I mean, as I mentioned, I struggled with public speaking. I noticed a lot of the other engineers that I work with struggled with public speaking. So I thought once I got a lot better at it, I would take a lot of the things that I learned in becoming a more effective public speaker and turn it into a course. And I did that. And so now I have this course, but I have no clue what to do with it. I didn't know how to market it. I didn't know anything about branding. I didn't know how to sales, none of that. Because I worked as a product development engineer. What the hell do I know about sales? So I did a whole lot of stuff on my own to try to figure things out. But I quickly realized that I don't know what I'm doing. I actually did a webinar. So I joined this Facebook group. And in the Facebook group, they said, webinars are really important to get your name out there. But I didn't have an email list. So I asked the people that, the admins in the Facebook group, is this something I should still do without having an email list? And they said, yeah, invite your friends and family and do it. Just, get it done. And I said, all right, I'll do it. And so I invited friends and family. I hired a virtual assistant to help me with developing the webinar. And the day of the webinar came and no one showed up. my own mother didn't even show up. So I'm presenting, but I still went through with it. I mean, I paid the VA, money to help me put this presentation together. So I still went through with it. And so I spoke for, about 30 minutes or so. And then I wanted to watch the replay. And so I did that. And then I realized that the slide never advanced past the presentation never advanced past the first slide.
Oh.
Yeah.
So good thing nobody showed up.
Well, if someone had showed up, they would have told me that.
Right.
Oh, I got you.
Do you think mom was like, yeah, that's what you get for not listening to me after you turned 18?
Maybe. That was a long time to wait for her to get her justice.
Yeah, right.
So when you think about this process, so I think everybody except for maybe James, we all have these aspirations. Like, I want to write a book. Like, I want to be an author, right? And I have all these great ideas, whether it's something technical like you're doing, or whether it's maybe fiction or not, whatever it is. What's that process like, especially for technical? Because I imagine writing something like this is different than just writing like something imaginative that's like a fiction book. So give us a snapshot of what that process looks like and maybe some of the challenges you ran into with the writing process.
To be very honest, the actual writing of the book wasn't that difficult because essentially I took the format of the course and essentially translated it, I guess, in a smaller way to the book. So when I decided to write the book, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't a long book. Essentially, I wanted to make sure that people would actually read it. So before I started the book, I went on Amazon and I read reviews of just random business books. And I wasn't reading the 4- and 5-star reviews. I was reading the 1- and 2-star reviews. So essentially what people didn't like about certain books.
Right.
And it seemed like over and over again, the one main criticism was that books were unnecessarily long. So people would have the critique that, this book could have been half as long. There's a whole lot of repetition in there, a whole lot of filler. And so I really wanted to make sure that if I wrote a book, it was going to be to the point and, short in the sense that people would actually read the whole thing as opposed to, just reading the first third and then throwing it aside. So that was something that I definitely took into account when I started the book. But essentially, the course that I developed, it follows a 6-step process. So essentially the book follows that same 6-step process for presenting, practicing and presenting any speech. So essentially the book, in a sense, kind of wrote itself because I developed the course beforehand. So essentially writing the book wasn't as difficult as it probably could have been if I was just starting from scratch.
Okay. I was going to ask what the 6-step process is, but then I guess no one would buy the book if you tell us that.
Yeah,
so,
you got to keep something.
That secret. Yeah. So Luke, I was telling him about this interview that we had coming up with you, and he mentioned to me that being self-published places is kind of the new thing that all the kids are doing. But there's also still publishing houses out there, traditional publishing. Are you published through someone? Are you self-published? And do you, for all of us aspiring authors out there like Luke, do you have advantages or disadvantages for those two options?
I'm self-published, and the main benefit of self-publishing is you kind of have a bit more control over the final product. I mean, I didn't do all that much research into, I guess, the differences between using a publishing house and self-publishing. I really just wanted to have more, full control over the content of the book, and then the marketing and the branding of the book too. So it just seemed like self-publishing was what would make sense. So that's the reason I went down that route.
So if you go with a publisher, they actually manipulate your content or modify it a bit?
That's my sense, and okay. They have a lot more say into the final product in terms of editing.
Makes sense.
So you have one book in the bank. Any thoughts on another one, or perhaps another and or different course, perhaps online on the horizon for you?
Oh, for sure. So essentially, I'm starting off with Teach the Geek to Speak, and that has to do with public speaking. But us people in the STEM fields, we have a whole bunch of problems. So I'm gonna put a bunch of courses together. I'm thinking about a course on networking, a course on interviewing, a course on negotiation. There's a bunch of different types of courses that would be of interest to people like me, and things that I struggle with. For instance, I'm not very good at negotiating, so I definitely would not put together a course on negotiating because it'd be a very short course because I already know what the hell I'm talking about. So I would definitely engage somebody else, a different course creator to put that course together and then have it on my platform.
See, maybe we'll be able to subscribe to some of these, Luke.
Yeah.
I'm going to share my password with him, though, so we only pay once. But I feel like a lot of these courses are something that we could benefit from. Not saying that we suffer, but maybe.
And if you want a course on how to put a podcast together, let us know and you can interview us. If that would ever be a course you'd be interested in doing. How
to make the most popular podcast in the Pittsburgh area about engineering, hosted by James and Luke.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice. That's a good ring to it.
Okay. So I saw you had a bunch of success story, like successful quotes on your webpage about people that have worked with you. I was wondering if these are people that have gone through the course, if these were people that have read your book, or maybe they actually went to something, obviously not your first webinar experience, but something where they saw you speak publicly about the topic, and that's where they're giving this feedback at.
Oh yeah, all the people that are on the website, those are the people that actually took the course.
Oh, excellent. So I saw it was, what, a 6-part course? Is that what you said?
Well, it's a 6-step course. There's I believe there are 4 modules, but between the 4 modules, I present the 6-step process that I suggest people use to practice and deliver any speech they have to give. And
how long will it take me to get through my modules?
The whole course takes about 90 minutes.
Oh, that's not too bad. I think I could manage that.
Yeah, you could easily. So the other thing too is, so James and I are always, and I'm sure other folks out there are interested in this, we're always looking at ways to make money. And obviously we don't want to see your W-2 or anything like that. But so people actually like pay for like you to show up, give a speech about public speaking, whether it's at a company or a conference. So I'm just looking at ways to supplement my income. I mean, is this like something that you get paid to do? I get the conference and I get the book because those are like things that you get,
they're
but
tangible.
They're tangible. But like conferences, so you actually get paid to show up at conferences and speaking engagements.
Yeah. So there's speaking engagements, companies, putting on workshops at companies. Of course, there's the income from the course and the income from the book, and then I also have a workbook that goes along with the book. So there's that as well. Like you're absolutely right. I mean, this is also kind of a work in progress for me as well, coming up with the various income streams. Oh, and I guess I have another book too, my children's book. So I get income from that as well.
I was going to ask you about that. I saw that you had a children's book. Now, is this teaching children to speak at a young age or overcoming being uncomfortable in front of their peers when they're speaking? Or what is this book about?
Oh,
completely
no.
Unrelated.
Yeah, completely unrelated to public speaking. But it is related to STEM, though.
Oh, okay.
The book is about my 9-year-old, well, soon to be 10-year-old nephew, and him asking me why his hair is different than that of his classmates. And I use science to answer that question. And the name of the book is Ask Uncle Neil, Why Is My Hair Curly? It's the first of what I would hope to be, or I'm planning to have a series of him asking me questions and me using science to answer those questions.
That's really cool. I was thinking that I should ask Uncle Neil why I have such a large receding hairline, but I don't think we're going to touch on that one right now. So it hurts. So that's really cool. But we have a friend who also writes children's books, and they're somewhat STEM related. We're going to give a shout out to our friend Trevor.
Yeah.
And he claims to me
he's lying.
this is not a very lucrative business that he's involved in.
Children's books.
He
I think
says
he's
that
lying.
he's not making a fortune on his books, and I think he's lying.
How hard could it be? These are kids. That's the audience. Like, you can write anything you want.
Apparently not. So do you believe him that he's not becoming rich and famous, or do you think he's just lying to us and he's actually banking some cash on this thing?
Well, I guess it depends on your reach of the book. You know, a lot of people make their book money on doing readings in various places, schools, libraries, that kind of thing, or even in bookstores. So you can make some good money doing that.
I think we're really missing out on an opportunity of having Unprofessional Engineering going and doing like speaking opportunities to inform people about engineering topics very poorly.
Yes.
I feel like there must be a market for that, right? No?
There's a market.
Your silence speaks
loud.
loud.
You gotta put things out there and try it out. So, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. So when I first put the course together, I didn't do any kind of, so you guys are marketers. So I didn't do any kind of market validation because I didn't really know what that meant. So I put the course out there because I knew I struggled with public speaking. I knew other people struggled with public speaking, but I had no clue of whether people would be willing to take my course and be willing to pay for it. I didn't even take any of that into account when I put the course together. And luckily that it turned out to be the case. And I found out that it turned out to be the case, not because of my own research. It was because I ended up hiring an agency to help me. So after that failed webinar, I realized that, you know, I can't do this again, you know, have a webinar and have no one show up, not even my mom and dad. So I had to do something new. So I engaged this agency to help me with my branding, marketing, and sales. I
know that when I show up to even one of our training sessions, like at Autodesk University, and the class is, we'll say less than full, it's always that feeling like, oh no, like this is that disinteresting to people that I know the people that actually showed up are going to get up and leave partway through. So that's always a worry. But it's good that you had an agency to then help you out with validating that this is something that people needed or were interested in. That's always good.
Yeah. So one last question, kind of related to something that you just said here. You were talking about, you had to take a pretty big risk, right? So you were making this without necessarily knowing what the demand was going to be. I mean, you saw it in your own kind of circle of influence, the people that you worked with, but you kind of had to kind of step out in faith a little bit there and know that this was maybe going to do something down the road. So the question is, if one of our listeners is sitting out there, or maybe it's me and James, and we're thinking, you know, I want to become an author, I want to maybe do online classes, maybe I want to go be a speaker like you're doing. Is that something you'd recommend because of that kind of leap of faith that you have to take? Or is that something that is kind of only for the brave?
Yeah. Should I quit my job today?
Well, you know, the way I look at it is, the crazy thing is, I didn't even think of it as a leap of faith when I was doing it, because, I mean, as I mentioned, I thought this was going to be, you know, something that was going to be very popular right away. It's only I realized after I did it that maybe that wasn't the case, and I needed this help from this agency. So I didn't even look at it as taking a leap of faith at the time. But, you know, going back, I definitely would have done it again, because ultimately you have one life to live, and you don't want to have, you know, a whole bunch of regrets, as, you know, things that you thought you could have done, but you didn't because you were afraid. One thing I would have maybe done a little differently if I could do it all over again is I would have had it as a side hustle, perhaps. And then I would have been able to see that, okay, this is something that's I can validate. This is something that is needed or wanted, and it has an audience for it. And I could have done all that while still having the security of having a full-time job and an income coming in that way. So, I mean, that's one change that I would have made.
I didn't realize that you just went full in on this.
You went cold turkey in on this.
Oh, I assumed it was side hustle. Ooh, well, good for you. I'm glad it worked out.
Neil said it. You and I are quitting our jobs tomorrow.
Yes. Watch out, Unprofessional Engineering. Here we come full time. Oh, well, that's outstanding. Well, we're going to have to call it quits for today's interview. I learned actually a lot about how I'm going to improve my public speaking, and that maybe it's me and not everybody else that's listening to me.
Definitely you.
That's hurtful. Neil, thanks a lot for joining us. And one more time, how can people either get their hands on your book, on your course, or get in touch with you?
Yeah, so they can go to teachthegeek.com. And as I mentioned earlier, I also have a YouTube channel where I interview STEM professionals that do public speaking. And you can get access to that through youtube.teachthegeek.com, and then Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Teach the Geek for all three.
Okay.
Awesome.
Sounds
well,
good.
Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Have a good day.
You too.